Hello, and welcome to Gibson's Bookstore virtual events. I am Elizabeth, the events coordinator at Gibson's Bookstore, and I am joined by Rebecca Kaiser Gibson. Hello, Rebecca.
Howdy.
This is a Gibson at Gibson's event. The name is a happy accident. You are not related to the store, but we like having extra Gibsons splashed anywhere. So we're always thrilled anytime you contact us. We are here tonight for the launch of the virtual launch, I suppose, at Gibson's of your new novel, The Promise of a Normal Life. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So you have previously published poetry, and now you are diving into novels. We're very excited for this tonight. You had mentioned when we were chatting about how we were going to do this event that you wanted to do some readings, and then audience members, there's going to be participation on your part. If you have any questions, comments, observations, lines, or thoughts that struck you in Rebecca's reading, please put them in the chat sidebar. We're going to have a couple comments and observation breaks throughout this event. If you have any of those comments or thoughts or things that are just like, wow, that's amazing, put that in the chat sidebar. We'll be bringing them up as we're taking a couple breaks throughout. The Promise of a Normal Life is available from Gibson's Bookstore. And Rebecca, please tell us about your book.
I'll tell you about the book by reading from the book. I hope you all know that I can't actually see you, which I'm really sad about. But so I'm going to, yesterday when I did the very first reading of this book, I read a long section. Tonight, I thought I would read a whole bunch of little sections to give you a feel of how the book works. It does jump around in time. It starts in 1967 and then goes back to 1958 and then moves back up to 1967 to proceed with what left off in the beginning. And then it goes, back and forth to other dates, and I will tell you where we are in those dates. But I'm going to start with the very beginning, and this is actually the longest piece I'm going to read, which is set in 1967. And the title of this chapter is Wait. There's a picture of me at 18 on the boat to Israel. I'm wearing a white-ribbed wool dress and looking really thin and tan. I'm gesturing to my companions at the table. They all seem to be listening to me. Alice, the French girl, is next to me, and Devora, with her wide Israeli face and black hair, who's going to be a lawyer, is across from us. I just finished my junior year in England. On the last day of the term, the lowering gray sky had suddenly cleared to light, fresh rain and then sun. The university blossomed with students and faculty carrying transistor radios and listening intently to the news in Israel. It turned out to be a war that lasted only 6 days. I was walking down a gravel path to my dorm room, listening to the damp crunch of each step of my blue shoes and enjoying the bright rim of clouds around the first sunset in days, when I saw Professor Schiff striding dramatically towards me. Professor Schiff was American, a friend of my uncle, married to a British woman. They had invited me for tea once, and I walked timidly around their house full of miniature American carousels with hand-painted ponies and full-size gumball machines equipped with early American candies. Schiff looked and acted like Leonard Bernstein. His long gray coat swooped from side to side at each step without apology. He was larger than life and handsome. So when the dazzling Schiff approached me and asked me by name in a slightly challenging voice if I'd be going to Israel now that the war was won and the holidays started, I answered, yes, just because he acted as if I was there, a real person, a grown Jew. Just because I could not think suddenly of any reason not to. It seemed such an adventure, so stirring, so like what someone should do. After all, I just started to read Doris Lessing's The Golden Notebook, the first book I'd ever read from my own point of view, a young woman's. I flew to Paris, then took the train down to Marseille, equipped with a map and Doris Lessing. From the day my father had driven me to college in the Midwest 2 years before, I felt as if I'd sailed out from under a brooding cloud that had always draped me. I probably should have said in the beginning that the speaker is, well, she's named I. She doesn't have a name in the book. And I'm skipping around. Now she is in the boat, on the boat to Israel. There were strawberries for breakfast on the ship and bright oranges that said Jaffa in small print in English. Jaffa, Jaffa, Jaffa. Unlike the sun-kissed I was used to, whose navel peel fell into the palm, these Jaffas were tenacious. When I bit, a bright orange-red taste sprang to my tongue. At my table, Devorah and Alice were returning home to Israel. At 18, the same age as me, Devorah was already a woman. Her hair was thick, sexual somehow. Devorah welcomed us, her table mates, to the trip to Israel, to the table full of food, to our whole lives from then on. Devorah did not even bother to hold the round and friendly mound of her belly in tight, as I'd been taught. Alice, however, wrapped her thin arms around her waist. She wore skirts that flipped, Frenchly, I thought, at her stride. Alice painted her toenails red. Alice put an icy blue hand on my glowing one. "Are you going to the dance?" she asked. I ate my lox and bagel in measured bites, claiming possession of the table. Alice waited for me to answer. Alice repeated, "There's a dance in first class and we could sneak up after it starts." A stowaway bee buzzed over my breakfast, feasted on the open orange segment. This is where I belong, I thought. That night, the moon draped the silky water in ribbons. Alice and I waited under warm stars. She was sheathed in a slinky garment with a black cashmere shawl held tight. "Allons-y," said Alice, when it was dark enough to escape tourist class. We streaked up the rubberized steps to first class. I, who was experiencing the whole trip as a dream, was imagining the late night movies my father always fell asleep watching. I expected to see couples leaning in black and white in simultaneous arching bends. I expected the dark cuffs of men's dinner jackets, the definition of their jaws against the Breck halo hairdos of their partners. The dancers would skate over polished floors. The violins would lift waves from the sea. At the top of the stairs, I noticed that the door was marked in 3 languages, "Do not enter." I heard violins and entered. Whoops, I skipped something. Inside, lights above the small dance floor, cool as blue moons, reflected softly off the scuffed floor. I saw Alice, her skinny form already pressed like tape against the buttoned front of a man, her bony white arms dangling over his shoulders. Next to her, a gorgeous couple laughed, and the woman, a blonde decorated in rhinestones and wearing a gold lame gown, touched the man with her long fingernails. The woman gestured in my direction. The man looked at me. He was breathtaking, his hair a dark velvet, his skin smooth. Minutes later, I sensed his dark suit by my side. The man introduced himself as Yaakov, smiled with onyx eyes, and offered a glass of wine. We stood together, silver cup almost touching silver cup, full of cool, dark wine. "I work for the ship," Yaakov whispered, his voice fluttering over my head, his breath soft. "I take care of people on the ship." Dancing with him, I imagined hundreds of butterflies nestled like my hand in Yaakov's. I'm the ship's beautician, he said. I do hair. I tried to keep my breath calm, letting the words step into position. I should come to you for mine, then. Mine had been scorched dry while strolling the Mediterranean shore in Marseille. It's lovely, Yakov said professionally. He raised his cuffed wrist toward my hair. It hovered there, dipped as if to rest on my shoulders, then dropped to his side without touching me. When could I come then? Yakov smiled. A waiter bowed in his direction slightly. Yakov's smile sparkled everywhere. I loved it flickering on me. He was all booked up, he told me. How about lunchtime? He asked. Lunch together, I thought, pleased, imagining the white napkins of first class, the crusty bread, wondering what I would tell my table mates. I think I'm free over lunch, if you would not mind, he finished. Why would I mind? The sangria was flattening the sharp edges of my mind. Mind, he added, as if reading mine, if you come to the salon over lunch hour. The next day, the beauty salon surprised me, since of course it wasn't built as one, but was a regular cabin with the beds removed and dryer chairs installed. No one else was in the salon. Lunchtime, Yakov reminded me, shutting the door behind me, gesturing to a green vinyl chair. Yakov released the chair top, which leaned back with barge-like majesty, presenting me head first to the deep porcelain sink. My shoulders eased of their own accord against the green. My eyes fell shut. My head rocked easily on the fulcrum of Yakov's hands. Yakov held my head in his hands and began to shampoo, rubbing with tumbling thumbs so that behind my eyes rococo jugs rolled off the shelves. He drew spirals with his fingers, paisleys in the deep undergrowth of hair. The water was warm, frothy in the shipboard sink, my hair swirling around his hands like vines. Yakov hummed, serenading his own work. I must have drifted, supported on his palms, into a deep sleep, no longer alone as I'd been all the last traveling weeks. Under the cascading water of the sink, I dreamed of floral air, the primroses from the shady side of my father's garden, the twittering of squirrels and doves. Years later, I still puzzled about the next sequence of events. I'll stop there for a minute. Anything anyone wants to ask, say, see, anything?
That's a wonderful start. Thank you for starting us off with that. First question for you is, what made you pick this time period?
Well, is that a question somebody asked? Or
No,
you?
I wanted to know that.
Because I'm familiar with it. I guess that's what made me pick it. And I'm interested, one of the things I'm interested in the course of this book is the way the women's liberation movement, which was just beginning to sort of filter down to people who weren't paying attention to it, plays in the life of this person. You know, the Doris Lessing book, which was very risque at the time, is her kind of introduction to a whole other world. So that's part of why I picked it.
Okay, so to our audience members, if you have observations, lines that jump out at you, this is where we'll be doing this a few times. Let us know if you have any observations, questions. I want to know, the marketing description, the publisher's description of the book is mentions that this is the quiet young woman at the Seder.
Seder.
Seder, at the Seder. She doesn't seem particularly quiet. She seems quite bold.
Okay. Well, that's a good segue. We're going to move to 1958 and you'll begin to see the quiet part.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Let's go.
Her immediate family is Paulina is her mother, Leonard is her father, and her sister is Joyce. And I think I have several places where I'll let you see some of their interactions and maybe some other people too. Probably, so it's 1958, not 1967 now. Probably it was an autumn Saturday when Paulina had decided to move all the family's wool clothes down from the summer attic storage in mothballs. My father was away. He traveled often then for the film industry. Paulina had been listening to the Saturday opera on the radio, turned up dramatically loud, filling the whole house. Weekends, especially when Leonard wasn't there, were dedicated to Paulina's projects. When Len was there, the projects didn't go so well. When he was home, he just wanted to relax, read the paper, have people over for drinks or lunch. Well, who's going to serve them, Len? Paulina would ask. I'm not going to be chief cook and bottle washer, goddammit. No one is asking you, he would roar back. It was like Olympian gods, huge, thunderous mountains. Neither would retreat. But if he were there on a Sunday morning, my father would often get up early and take me with him to the deli. He'd stand in front of the rounded counter, his own belly growing more convex over the years, and point with a thick, kind finger and delight in his voice. How about a couple of pounds of that lox, a dozen bagels, and let's have a quarter pound of that sturgeon for mommy, eh? He'd smile, lifting an eyebrow in mock, quizzical gesture. I loved watching him survey the display. He seemed so comfortably pleased with the food. Without him, the food looked repulsive. Wide trays stacked deep in pinkish salmon with yellowy strips. Dead heaps of smoked whitefish without heads, their scales a greenish gold. They were grabbed in the middle by the fat-handed guys in aprons behind the counter. Oily mackerel, dull, limp pickles. But with my father, the scene transformed to one of promise and delight. Let's get a little coffee cake, he'd say, as if it were a novel idea. He'd pick out a poppy seed ring. It would be wrapped in a square white box with a skinny striped string tied in a bow. And now, sorry, my little technique of going from page to page isn't working. Hold on. Well, this is as good as any. This section is called, the section I'm reading is from the chapter that is called Sex Ed. My mother had called me into her study, a small room where she kept her medical books, her opera records, and the household bills. I didn't know why I had been called in. Paulina had a legal pad with yellow-lined pages and sat in front of me as if the study were a small seminar room. I'm going to show you where babies come from, she announced, quite out of context. It was 6 p.m., an hour before dinner. I'd been sitting in my room reading something for history class about the Roman Empire and doodling at the desk facing the western sunset. I was hungry, but since Paulina was home early and Elsie was cooking, I couldn't go into the kitchen. Paulina had already drawn the anatomy of the lower half of the female body in thick lead strokes. I'd never seen my mother draw anything, not ever. So it was striking just to see the lines, though I couldn't tell what it was since there was no head and no feet. Here is where the eggs are made, Paulina said, demonstrating the location on the yellow pad with the rounded point of a pencil. If they're not fertilized by the daddy, they are thrown away. I didn't have any idea what Paulina was talking about. I didn't understand what fertilizing could have to do with what she was explaining, since my association with fertilizing was so literal. In the fall, my father would take out the rusty fertilizer spreader and fill it with a sweet-smelling white powder that he sifted over the lawn. The lawn needs to eat. It's hungry, he'd say. We have to find a day between rains. There needs to be rain or the fertilizer will burn the grass, he'd explain. Fertilizer, for the lawn at least, seemed paradoxically a dangerous and crucial addition. but I knew enough not to interrupt Paulina's explanation. I got the part about the eggs traveling down the fallopian tubes because Paulina had drawn them descending, but I didn't understand how eggs turned to blood. Well, not blood. Paulina had called it something else. I thought that maybe it was like the inside of cracked eggs. I was sitting on the hassock, watching, trying not to move. I thought that if I moved, Paulina might tell me to stop fidgeting. I probably had a stupid expression. Paulina had closed the door to the study, making this an unusual private meeting. A privilege, even one I didn't understand, was not to be squandered. When Paulina concluded that the process with the unfertilized eggs led to menstruation, I was aghast at her mouthing of that word. No one called it menstruation. Paulina continued, is not a sickness. Do you understand? It's perfectly natural. I was aware that she was trying to contradict someone. Elsie told me you had been sick a few weeks ago and you were not sick, Paulina insisted. I know. I never thought I was. In the quiet of the den, Paulina closed the legal pad and took a Chesterfield out of the pack. She inhaled deeply. There was still a smoldering cigarette in her ashtray. She had snubbed it when she started the lecture, but not snuffed it. I watched the smoke in a combination of calm and agitation. I couldn't imagine what was coming. Was my mother going to tell me about sex? I didn't know what was involved with sex, but I had just read Othello in Mr. Lepin's class, and I loved the idea of a beast with two backs. I loved the idea of Mr. Lepin. He had aquatic eyes, green and quick. He had a slim body. He was an actor. He did Gilbert and Sullivan in the summer. I'd seen him strike his lovely thespian poses, his body arching up toward a raised hand, his agile voice rippling over complicated lines. He thought I was brilliant at reading Shakespeare. Paulina must have mistaken my stillness for rapt attention, but it wasn't. It was more like conjuring, trying to bring up the sylvan green of language, of Mr. Lepin, of moonscape and mystery in this room thick with smoke and ugly words. Dear, Paulina was saying, excuse me, in a new voice, a voice that indicated that she was going to address me in some new way. I held my breath. I didn't want to think about what she was going to talk about. But she said, I was married once before Daddy. I was very young. My father saw the man kiss me and insisted that I marry him if I wanted to go back to school in Scotland. I knew it wasn't right. Paulina puffed on her cigarette. On our way to getting married, I made him agree that if it didn't work out, we'd divorce. I didn't know where to begin, nor in a way was there any need to begin. It was all done, sewn up, dismissed. There seemed no particular lesson to be gleaned, not like the distinct notion that to have your period was not to be sick, a confusion I hadn't even had, just a capsule of events delivered like a pill. This is a little segue. I mean, a segue not in the book so much as in this discussion with you or conversation with you. This is a little section about the two girls and Elsie, who works in the house. Once, when I was about 8 and had a really bad case of poison ivy, our parents had been out of the country. It was a hot September weekend that day, and Elsie had decided to take us to the air-conditioned movies. The movie was Gone with the Wind. So there we sat, Joyce on one side, Elsie, a large black woman with a bowl of calamine lotion in her lap, in the middle, and me on the other side. I watched the movie through a screen of tears, interrupted every so often by Elsie leaning over to dab pink calamine on my arms, which I must have been rubbing. The irony of the scene was apparent to neither of us girls. We emerged from the wonderfully chilly movie theater, all three, with teary red eyes. My skin was a flaky pink from dried layers of lotion. So there is also an undercurrent in the book of her being aware of the Black people in her environment and their role there as servants and her discomfort with it, but she didn't have, language about it. And now I want to read a little from the chapter called The Silent Person. And this takes place at a Seder, the ceremony at Passover. The Silent Person. From my position across from my sister in the middle of the long table, I could see our mother perched at one end. The two of us had the only silver goblets. We faced one another, divided by a huge bouquet. I sat stiff, leaning a little forward. The ice cubes, the silverware, the anticipation of the 15 guests were all shimmering. Paulina put a thin Spanish lace scarf on her head. It rested on her head crookedly. She began to say the words to the first blessing. Every year she asked questions about one or two of the words. When she read them, she usually, with a great forcing sound, got the one she worked on right, while all the others around it faltered. Ha-olam, like this, Mommy, I'd said. Ha means the, olam, world. Blessed art thou, King of the world. I tried by dint of the majesty of the meaning to force her into the proper intonation. She always laughed. Baruch atah Adonai, she recited, her head moving up and down to the words as though she could bob them out of her. Blessed art thou, the chorus intoned. Paulina removed the scarf as all eyes looked elsewhere. Completely embarrassed, under the table, my thighs pressed against the chair, I imagined their girth. All the lights are shining on me, I thought, mortified by the one bulb that was indeed over my head, though not particularly bright. Oh, for a pulsing feathered bird to thunder itself up to me in the gargantuan night, its heavy wings spread hugely over my bed. I wish something Shakespearean would take me somewhere where I'd be beautiful. This is a good place to stop for a minute, see if there's anything.
We do have some comments and questions. This is great. Thank you, our audience members. Someone said that they loved how you can practically see the deli displays and that they love the girl's perspective that came in when she was talking about her father fertilizing the grass. And I love that as well, because it's the literal interpretation of things. You're just like, I feel like we're not getting all the words that you do when you're a child. And someone liked the line, just a capsule of events delivered like a pill. Couple questions coming in from us. Kristen says, I love how the sentences contain these little cinematic moments. The bee on the orange, the speaker sinking back toward the shampoo basin, the moment she disobeys the sign and crosses into first class. Do you think this is influenced by your poetry at all, or no?
I don't know. I don't know if my poetry influences me. I think I look the same way at the world, whatever I'm writing. So I guess the answer is yes, but it's not influencing me. I'm influencing it, I think.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Let's see here. Who asked this question here? Samuel says, hello, Becca. Greetings and congratulations from Brooklyn.
Hi, Sam.
The novel is written in the first person, but were you writing a memoir, a meditation on your actual experience, or were you creating a compelling story, not bound by your own experience, but evoking the times of your young womanhood?
I pick a compelling story if I have a choice. Okay.
You're the author. It can be whatever you want it to be.
This is not a memoir. If I were writing a memoir, I would have opinions about these things, whatever things I would be writing about. The opinion of the my opinion as a writer, isn't in this book except in the titles of the sections. I should I mean, that's the only thing I should give you a little background about how I wrote this book, which was in a weird way kind of by accident. So for over years I was teaching, 23 years I was teaching, and apparently during those years I was writing these little sections which I never thought of putting together until the pandemic, when I went to clean out the closet that's behind me, where there were all sorts of like little packets, little stapled packets of sections of prose. And I thought, oh, with some help with the help of some friends who said, you know, this is a book. I thought, I think I can put this together in you know, in a kind of interesting order that's not exactly chronological. I can't remember where I'm going with this. Do you remember where I started?
You were right. Came about.
Yeah. Anyway, somehow it's related to what Sam was asking, and I have no idea where I'm going with that. So it'll probably come up in my head somewhere along the way here.
Of course. Well, it is certainly a compelling story so far. Do you have more for us?
Mm-hmm. This next section I'm going to read goes back to 1967. It's later in the book. And after the incident, which I did not read to you about, I read up to it in the first chapter of what happens when she's in the salon chair. She is now in Israel, and she's followed the suggestion of Yaakov that she see some lawyers about this incident, and this is the scene at the lawyers. The door to the office opened. Two men sat on one side of a wooden table. There was a single chair on the other side for me. The room gave off a wooden male smell. The men had jowly faces. So, said the first, with a leonine head of tawny hair and eyebrows. He had a knowing, legalistic scowl that reminded me of my father. The other man had gray hair slicked to his head, coating it like a seal's. His nose pointed aggressively. His very skin seemed to sniff, to be searching for some bad odor. He himself, down to the fingernails that tapped on the table, was scrupulously clean. He was annoyed, slightly disgusted. So, the lion repeated. It was a long moment, during which I sat opposite the two men, aware that they were waiting, but not sure for what. I was much more frightened here than in the beauty salon. These men, with hair growing on their large fingers, waited in silence. The man with the tawny hair reached around and scratched his shoulder. Will you make it simple? Sign this paper and admit here that you did ask Yaakov to sell you the hashish. I stared at him. His huge eyes were thunderous. Hashish? I repeated. I had heard the word, but never said it. It had a nice sound to it, like a lullaby, a whisper to a child, hashish. But I didn't know what it looked like, only the sound, which I said again, hashish? Both lawyers lighted cigarettes and waited. Dumbfounded, I watched the smoke from both cigarette tips in dizzy spirals. Nothing I could hold on to stayed still. I shut my eyes and took my spinning head in both hands. Now I'm skipping to her leaving Israel, and the title of this little section is The Black Russian. When the summer ended, I was scheduled to return to the US. This is also 1967. My layover in Paris was 3 hours, and I had the equivalent of $10. Alone in Orly Airport, I suddenly recaptured the sense of poise I'd begun to feel at the start of the trip to Israel. I strolled into the airport bar and ordered a Black Russian. I'd read about bars and about Black Russians, I took a high stool at the bar and no one contested my claim. The drink arrived in a crystal glass with a small beard of white froth around the edges. How easy it was to play the role. One sip of sweetness circled my mouth. I felt the alcohol cleaning and tranquilizing me. For 3 hours, I sipped, each inhalation a vaporous whisper, each exhalation a breath full of alcohol. Here, anonymous at the bar, serenity settled on me. The very bones in my hands gracefully displayed my fingers on the fine wood. Then she lands and her father picks her up and she decides to tell him about what happened. I'll skip down to, I plunged on, hoping my father wouldn't ask for more details. His brow was so tightly clenched that I couldn't see the skin in the crevice. He puffed on his after-meal cigar, relieved to be past the sexual scene and onto the ethical. I was comforted that we would share a certain cynicism. He would appreciate my wit, my sleight of hand, my ducking under the false gate so deftly by signing the silly piece of paper. Did he try to contact you again? Leonard suddenly demanded, leaning forward on the table as if he might push off into a whirlwind of orders. No, I answered quietly. I had forgotten that my father believed in the sanctity of the legal document, not in the exigencies of travel. For him, there was no foreign moment. Moving his head from side to side, as if to rid himself of some substance clinging to his face, he began. Listen very carefully. I'm only going to say this once. You've been extremely lucky, but I don't want repercussions. Does he have our home address? I shook my head, sad that the event had been misconstrued and I'd never be able to reclaim it. If he ever does try to reach you, you are to let me know immediately. I laughed at the autocratic command, catching sight of my clean, sun-bleached nails, remembering the scent of myself in the sun. This is very serious, Leonard interrupted. I nodded. I noticed I was clutching the napkin in my lap. I wondered what danger Leonard anticipated. A familiar, bleak misery filled me. I nodded because his eyes were beady bright. I agreed because I understood that all he cared about was my name, written in my hand, the only part of the incident I'd actually decided to do. You're not to talk to anybody about this, not to anyone ever. Leonard clamped the damp cigar between his lips. He drew air through the cigar until the cigar began to glow at the tip. My whole self seemed to thicken. So I'm wondering if the question about the silent one makes any more sense now in this sort of leapfrogging through the book.
It does. It sounds a little bit like she's been taught not to rock the boat.
Literally, right. Yes. Neat. Okay. Now we're jumping to 1968, the next year. Eyes like blue crystal. The first time I walked with Tom, my senior year, his galoshes stamped a dirty autumn puddle as high as my swinging clear hair. I leaned back to see the halo of sky. When I leaned back to see the halo of sky, he named the constellations. He kicked water up again to my eyes so that the stars spread as diffused broken lights. I'd returned from Israel to Kenyon, which seemed small to my newly enlarged eyes. Tom, though, was tall, confident, the best of America. His gaze level, his stance uncompromising. Tom looked up at the sky. Wait, he said, the moon is not supposed to be there tonight. Then he figured out why the aberration had occurred. His explanation made sense to him, so he accepted the moon's location. That he would question the moon and rely more on his own calculation. That he had such confidence in his own powers of deduction was enviable. I laughed and laughed at the relief of it. His eyes were bright blue, and they turned right on me and held me. I felt that he stared straight into the future, a blue highway across the country. I think that's the last one I'm going to read, unless there's happens to be anyone who happens to have the book and wants me to read something.
If anybody has any requests, let us know now. Excuse me. So now is the time, if you have any questions for Rebecca before we finish this event, now is the time to type them in. Kristen asks, all told, how many years does the book span?
Let me see.
I got all the way back to, I think, 1958. And
1958 to 1986.
86. All right, that's quite a long time for a book.
With lots left out.
Yeah. Not the whole thing. There's some jumping. Sandel says, I'm curious about the title. Where does it come from?
Oh, you want the honest answer, Sandel?
Give us both answers. Give us the pretty answer and the honest answer.
The pretty answer, there were many other titles on the way to thinking about this. And I have to go to the honest answer. The honest answer is a friend of mine was kind of thinking about what the book was doing. And in the course, she wrote it up. In the course of doing that, she had embedded the phrase, the promise of a normal life. And when I noticed it, I realized, I mean, it's very much from the outside. It's a very overview kind of title. And I thought that's because she wouldn't think about that. It's, a comment on her perspective and what kind of pushes her through all along thinking there's some normal that isn't whatever it is that she's experiencing, but she has no idea what it is. Still, it moves her. She keeps trying to get to the thing that you're supposed to do. And her reference points seem to be books and movies, and not what her mother is doing. It's not this, yes, that, but it's very thin, what the options are.
I feel like young people still do that too, where they're this is what's normal, what we've seen and consumed, and certainly not what my parents have ever done.
Right.
That sounds distressingly familiar. Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Allison asks, can you talk again about your process of putting the book together? It seems intuitively constructed.
Can Allison say a little more about intuitively constructed?
Ooh, while Allison types about that, if Allison is still near her keyboard, let's talk a little bit, I suppose, about how you put it together. You said that you had written pieces and then discovered them all and you've jumped back and forth throughout the timeline. How did you choose to jump back and forth instead of all going chronologically?
Right. Well, several things had happened from the time before when I had written these various sections. And one of the things was that I'd written 2 poetry books and put together the poems in a sequence. And I understood, and I guess that was intuitive also, but I understood a different thing about how to connect things. So for instance, when the first chapter is called Wait, the word wait repeats at various strategic points in the book, in sort of the way a word in a poetry manuscript might get woven through. And actually at one point, the whole book was badly titled Wait, and a publisher said, do not call a book Wait, because someone's going to start to buy it and there's going to be this word wait and they're going to think, don't do it, wait. Okay, so there was that. Also, I read Nick Flynn's book, The Ticking is the Bomb, and it was organized in little sections with sort of longer sections in between. So that gave me permission to break things up into much smaller pieces. Now, I didn't read any whole section here. So you don't have a sense yet, if you haven't got the book yet, of how those sections work, but that was also operating, and it was slightly chronological and slightly by association of words. I think that's.
You mentioned some of your books of poetry, especially Girl as Birch. You did a reading with us. Now, I would behoove me right now to mention that Girl as Birch and The Promise of a Normal Life are available from Gibson's Bookstore, and we would love to sell you a copy. Allison clarifies, it feels as if the sections are associatively related. I love that it's not chronological. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Correct? Okay, it's association.
And I love that it's not chronological also, because I think that the way a mind works is not chronological. It's by association. And part of my idea also was, and I don't know if you got a sense of it with what I read, is that she'll start to say something, and then she remembers something else, or projects imagines something else, and then comes back to the thing that's there. So in macro and in micro, it's by association.
Excellent. So we have time for one or two questions before we wrap up our event. I like to ask, what have your characters taught you in this book? Have you learned anything from them? About yourself, about the world, about the way the mind or words or the world works?
I've learned about her, how the speaker, how limited she is, and well-intentioned, and also not limited. I mean, she does see a lot of peripheral things. She rejects the thing that most people would think was the main event, and she sees around the edges. And I don't think I noticed that until I wrote it. And I mean, in a funny way, I probably shouldn't say this, but in a funny way, all the other characters are they aren't exactly characters of themselves, but they're limited. You don't get no one's a fully developed person, because they're all from her point of view, and she's only seeing little, slanty sections. And I found today and yesterday, when I was reading from it, I have this sort of affectionate tolerance for her, but I see how much she's like, I don't know, limited by her intense rejection of lots of things.
Interesting. I like that. That's about what we have time for tonight. Rebecca, thank you so much for coming back to us here at Gibson's Bookstore for this book, your first novel. Very exciting. Thank you for sharing that with us.
And thank you, Elizabeth. It's been really fun hearing you respond to these things.
To our audience members, thank you for joining us tonight and for your wonderful questions. We did record this tonight, so once we get it edited and put up on YouTube, we'll send the link out. Please do send it to any of your friends, family members, people you met on the street, anybody who thinks they need to know about this book. We'll do Rebecca that favor. Rebecca, congratulations on a successful launch week for this novel. Congrats. We hope to see you again soon for your next book. No pressure, but we'll see you then. And to our audience members, that's it for us tonight. Have a great night, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.